All right, here we are. It's Wacko Bob here, and doing a little video here while I got a little bit of time here, and just wanting to talk a little bit about this. This is probably going to wind up being a two-parter, but it's all good, and we're going to do this one here and get it done. Um, I've been getting a lot of questions asked of me, mainly about wrestling, and a lot of people saying no one's ever really done anything talking about the top members of the Four Horsemen. Well, I'm actually going to talk about each and every individual member of the Four Horsemen in my next video I'm going to do. But I want to do this one here mainly to talk about the the four different Four Horsemen lineups, and there have been several members of the Four Horsemen that have been that have been great. I mean, over the years. I mean, I could talk about them all, but it's just for me. Which ones really stand out? I'm going to just talk about the lineups here first off. A lot of people talk about the original lineup getting it done, being the best lineup. I don't have that as the number one lineup. I actually have that as the number two lineup of the Four Horsemen. I think probably the best lineup of the Four Horsemen would be the third lineup of the Horsemen when Barry Windham came into the group with Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson, and of course Ric Flair. I think that was probably the best group. I think that was the group with the longevity. I think that was the group that dominated and really could dominate because that lineup was just that good of a group of the Four Horsemen that really did. That's why they get recognition at the WWE Hall of Fame, and that's the one that I think really is. Number one would be Flair and Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and Barry Windham. Those four. Number two would be the original lineup with Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, Tully Blanchard, and Ric Flair. That would be number two, the original lineup. The original lineup really got things going and really had things going. You had them going around being called the Three Horsemen. And really, technically, the fourth horseman there was J.J. Dillon. And, it's just... that group really did a lot. That group really had, I think, a factor to it, a real it factor that I think really gave it the longevity it deserved. It deserved, even back then. And when you saw Ole come back, you really got to see something that looked like it was really started by him. And Ole, if you notice him, he was the one who really didn't have a title belt. When you really look at it, after he returned from injury or whatever it was he was doing. And that really showed him more to be like he was more the original enforcer of the Horsemen with the gimmick and the attitude that he had. I know Arn Anderson gets called the enforcer, but if you look at it, national champion, Tully Blanchard, television champion, Arn Anderson, world champion, Ric Flair, Ole Anderson there to complete it out, J.J. Dillon is the manager. It was definitely a group, and when you look back at that group, it really just showed that they were really the ones who really just set up something for that was going to be a piece of wrestling history. Now, I know when Ole Anderson left, they did the whole angle there. They had Lex Luger already there as the associate. The Luger lineup, which was the second lineup of the Horsemen after Ole left, that would be number three on my list. Luger wasn't the best performer, and he really needed someone who could really help carry the match because Luger was probably only in his second year as a pro wrestler and never really was a great performer. Never really was. And if you look at his stuff in Florida, he was made out to be almost Superman until it was time for him to be on the receiving end, and you never really got to see anything come out of Luger. And a lot of that happened because wrestlers really coming in at that time, really didn't want to give him that satisfaction of being on top. So when you look at that, you see Lex Luger, you see what really made the Horsemen So, I mean, that part of it you really got to look at there, and you really got to look at the end result there of Luger's career. When he left, you got to see him be Superman all over again, but it only lasted a short time. Then you really didn't have that superhero Lex Luger, as the babyface, but it still made his career for what it was. It's like Ric Flair said in the DVD, he didn't get a chance to perfect his craft, and that's not his fault. He was at a time where they really needed superstars, and I think Hiro Matsuda would have wanted to work with him more and get people to work with him more just to perfect his craft a lot more. But it was at a time where superstars were needed because everyone was caving into Vince or they were going over to Jim Crockett. And it was just not a time. And even Crockett was on the receiving end, even at that time, too, of what Vince McMahon was doing in the WWF at the time. So you really got to look at that. But Luger, as a member of the Horsemen, still looked good, still did something for it, and it was great. There was a chemistry there. Not as great as it was, though, with Barry Windham, or even Ole Anderson, for that matter. But it was great. I mean, so number 3 would be that one. It is a close number 3 to number 2. Number 1 will always be the Flair, Tully, Arn, Barry years, Barry Windham years as the Horsemen. They had, like I said, they had the longevity. They were dominating with the titles, the World Tag Team titles, the World Heavyweight Championship, and the United States Heavyweight Championship. So there was a little something there to look at. So I would have to say that one. Number 4 in the lineup, and a lot of people are going to really question me on this one. And I only do this because on paper this looked good. And even though Steve McMichael wasn't the best performer, I would have to say that, and I lose count of how many lineups there were at this point too, would have to be the Steve McMichael, Chris Benoit, Arn Anderson, Ric Flair time. McMichael at the time wasn't in the best shape. I mean, when you look at him in the later years when they reunited the Horsemen, he did not look to be in good shape at all. And he really just didn't have it. But if you look at that first time, he really did. Having him and his now ex-wife, his wife at that time, Deborah Marshall, it was Deborah McMichael at the time. And I've interviewed Deborah Marshall, super nice person. She even tried giving me the hookup with Steve McMichael, which I wish I'd gotten him. I wanted to, but I had things happening at the time in my life between both what was happening with what would now be my network and my show, The Dark Match, and my job at the time that I was on. So it was a tough time there. But Deborah Marshall, absolute sweetheart. I love her to death. But it was just one of those things. But it really was, and it counted more for Chris Benoit more than anything else. Because if Chris Benoit, and when you see me do my Horseman lineup, there's going to be a lot of questions. Chris Benoit was a perfect member of the Horsemen. If he could have been there as Ole Anderson was leaving, it would have been hard to beat. You would have had to get rid of this, which is hard to get rid of, just to bring in a Lex Luger or Barry Windham and just simply call them the Horsemen and not the Four Horsemen. Because especially during the NWO time, if you could have done that and just taken the Horsemen to the next level and just be the Horsemen and find something that could be used that could catch on just like this, and I don't mean this as as Fortune. Because they didn't give that one a chance to grow in TNA. It would have been great, I think you really would have had some good ones there. As far as the worst lineups, because I don't have that much time left here, I'm not running on my Wi-Fi with my cell phone, so I'm being limited in my time. I'm going to do some stuff to do the better one. The worst lineups, of course, the Paul Roma time was. And Paul Roma, no doubt one of the worst Horsemen. I will be honest, he put his best foot forward. He's not a bad performer, but given his career and what it was and what they knew him for, he just wasn't a Horseman. And he wasn't a Horseman given the lifestyle either, and what he was too. So you look at that, and there weren't 4 Horsemen at the time. There were only 3, and the rumor was Terry Taylor was going to be the 4th Horseman in that group. You never saw it during that time in 93 and 94. I mean, it was just not a good time, and that almost destroyed the Horsemen. It was just Wrong thing to do. I don't know what was on Eric Bischoff's mind, Ole Anderson's mind, Dusty Rhodes, whoever was in charge of the booking at the time, to really do that. But that was one of the worst. And and I have to say that also one of the worst times was after Arn and Tully left to go to WWE to be the Brainbusters, and you added in Kendall Windham and Hiro Matsuda for J.J. Dillon. Wasn't going to work out. Flair and Windham, were they strong enough to hold it together? Yes, but you weren't going to do it. And then when you saw them putting an alliance together with Michael Hayes that didn't work out, you saw the Freebirds get put back together again, and you saw the end of that thing. It was just not good. And the other one would have to be, and I'm being quick about this, would have to be the babyface War Horsemen with Sting in the group with Arn, with a returning Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson, and Ric Flair. And I think you did that because you couldn't get Tully Blanchard back in there. And that would have been another time to get rid of this, to come up with something, to call it the Horsemen, to have the originals with Barry Windham. And that would have been great too. But this had to be a quickie. I'm sorry this couldn't be any better. And we'll talk more about this at a later time. Thanks for listening in, and we'll talk about more about this.